So, kicking it off then, talk to us about how you got to where you got to now. Like, childhood to Marketing Millennials, what has that journey been like?
Yeah, so I was born in South Africa, and my mom decided when I was 7 years old to immigrate me and my two brothers to the United States. And my mom was a entrepreneur. She started her own business at 23. She was like an impressive woman entrepreneur, and it's not even a woman entrepreneur. She just was a badass entrepreneur. But like in South Africa, that's like a big thing because there wasn't any like woman entrepreneurs in South Africa at that time when she was 23. So she was really inspired me. She took us to the United States when I was 7, and I grew up in San Diego. And she was a single mother, so all my like inspiration came from seeing her working day in and day out. And when I got and I played sports my whole life because that was just what I was good at, and my parents were sporty people, so I just became really good at sports. I was never an academic person. I just knew how to work the system in academics to get by, but I was never an academic person. But I was always a sporty person. I played basketball, and then when I got to high school, I played football. But I always would work at my mom's company as I was growing up, going to her trade shows, helping her in the office. So it was really inspiring to see an entrepreneur like her growing up. And then I became really good at football in high school, so I went to go play college football. So a lot of my grounding comes from football. But when I was going to pick a major in college, I was like, oh, entrepreneurship, because that's all I know. My mom's an entrepreneur. Like, what else is there to do? So I picked entrepreneurship, and it was also helping me figure out like what I actually like in business, because I didn't know, was I a finance guy? Was I this type of guy? Was I a marketing person? Didn't know anything. But then I quickly realized I'm a marketing person because my mom's a marketing person at heart. So I quickly became a marketing person. And then I played college football, and I was like, I don't want to play college football. I want to do something in business. So I was like, oh, let me apply to a marketing job out of college. And it was hard to get a marketing job out of college because marketing jobs always have these things where it's like 3 to 5 years experience, and you just come out of college. Like, who has 3 to 5 years experience coming out of college? So I found a lucky job becoming a marketing automation person, and then quickly just fell in love with marketing and kind of jumped in the startup land. So I worked at a startup, then I worked at another startup, and eventually got to where I am now, where I'm working at a startup at Clearbit, helping customers with their marketing operations. But I always have my entrepreneurial drive, so that's why I have the Marketing Millennials on the side. I have my podcast on the side. I do a lot of side hustle, so always trying to do that. But I always say, like, entrepreneurship is like when you're ready. It's not like you have to be there. Like, sometimes you need to gain the skills to become an entrepreneur. I think like some people just inherently have it, like they could just start a business and they don't want to work. But I think some people need to just go learn from the best marketers for like 5 to 10 years and then start their business. I think there's no correct timing for like when you want to start a business, and eventually that's what I want to do. But I think it takes learning from the best before you do it, and that's my mentality. But other people's mentalities are just like, screw it, I don't want to work for anybody. So there's different mentalities.
I love what you've just said there about going and learning from the best before going out and starting your business, because that's exactly what I did. I, not intentionally, like, you're way more smart than I am. I did have no intentions of like, I'm going to go and learn all these things from other people and figure them out and take them into my business. But I do think, though, my experience in corporate and structure and learning how to sell and learning how to negotiate and all the things that I've had to do in my previous roles has meant that Klowt, my business, has done exponentially better than it would have done had I not had that experience. Do you think that, for context, right, Marketing Millennials is one of the biggest marketing podcasts out there. You're one of the most followed company pages and your socials are insane, your personal brand is insane. Do you think you've managed to grow that? I know you called it a side hustle, but that's really like your community. Have you managed to grow that community as a result of all the things that you've learned in previous roles? Or did it
Yeah,
just
I
come
think
naturally?
I think everything led up to like where Marketing Millennials was. So in college, I started a small side hustle. I mean, it's business with someone. It was to help people find events on campus. It was an app to help find people, and I realized I wasn't that good at marketing. Like I just was very scrappy, and I was like, that's where it came. The passion was like, okay, I can't really start a business right now. I don't know enough, so I went to go do it, and then all the time I've been like testing social media. I just on social media all the time. So I created a foodie account once, and I created this type of account once, and they were all like flops and failures. And but I think like me just being able to understand like concepts of marketing, because before when I was posting, I was like, how can I get the most amount of followers, or how can I get the most amount of likes? And it was not, I didn't get the principles of staying niche and talking about something that I'm passionate about all the time, and not caring about who likes it and who doesn't, and being consistent even though I'm getting no likes. I
How
didn't
do you
get
how
those
do you
content.
stay consistent when you get no likes though?
It's focusing on the end goal. I think focusing on like that at the end, I just want to talk about things that I'm passionate about, and the goal isn't for me to be famous. My goal is just like sharing a message to one person, and if one person gets something out of it, I've succeeded. So I think like when I'm creating content, I think about that one person I'm trying to affect at a time. I don't think about, oh, is this going to go to the masses? And usually when you think about one person, it ends up going to the masses, because you realize so many people have the same problem as you, or the same issues, or the same wanting to learn. Or but if you talk to one person, it's so much easier, and you know that one person, that one like, that person got value out of it. That's why I do it. And I also think that, like an athlete, I think you have to put practice and reps to that are harder than actual game time. So I think like when you like those zero like days, or those zero, or like those hard practices you have in sports, I think you have to have like the hard moments to enjoy like those championship moments. I think like if you don't have those hard moments, you can't. When you get a viral post, or when you get something that goes more than you thought, it is because you did all those little things that warmed you up, those practice, those days, and it makes it feel way better than it just happened. So I think like in sports for me, like I just remember going in and out every day practicing, and some days I had a bad practice, some days I had a great practice, some days I had a okay practice, but practice was always harder than the real game. And I think the real game is, for me, like I see like social media is like every day's practice, but the real game is the opportunities you get from it. Like the real game is just like the people you meet. The real game is like the steps that happen along the way, and nothing's built through one practice. You don't go to the gym tomorrow and run a 5K, and now you can go like be the fastest runner out there for 5K. You have to put in the work, and that's how I think about social media.
I love that you've used that analogy because I use that all the time. I always say, like, you don't go, right, I'm going to get the fittest, sexiest body I've ever had, and then go to the gym for 2 weeks and then complain that you didn't get that body. Like, you keep going until you get there. And moreover, you keep going once you're there because you have to maintain it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I love that analogy. Do you think that, obviously, like, context, you weren't just like any old football player, like you were D1, which for anyone in the UK listening is like Division 1, right? That's one below the NFL. That's there's not many people who get through life and make it to that point. What was it in I mean, I've kind of flip-flopped here, but it's just for my personal interest more than anything, because I've never asked you this question. Why did you quit football?
Because I think when you start, it's the same thing, and I'm going to correlate things back because this is a personal branding podcast. But I think when you start losing passion to your passion to get up every day to do something, or you start like the zero like days that we talk, all those bad practices, you don't have like that end goal of like doing something. You have to have a passion to do something. And I think when I played in high school, it was like, oh, this is super fun. And then I went to college and I'm like, oh, the games are fun, but practices are getting. And then I realized how much of a business and how much of a commodity you were. And I just didn't like the aspect of it. I enjoyed playing. I enjoyed playing some aspects of it, but I realized that my real passion isn't that. And I think it's important to try things to figure out if it is your passion. But I think like to play at a high level or do anything at a high level, and it's same as starting a business, as you probably know, like if you're going to do something all in, you better have some sort of inner drive to do it. Otherwise it's hard to succeed. And I saw like the people with actual drive that wanted to go to the NFL and wanted to make it, and I knew I didn't have that same drive, and I knew that they would always beat me because I didn't have that same drive. And high school was different. In high school I knew I wasn't the best player, and I was going to be the best in my high school and best and tried to be the best in the state or whatever of California. And I was just like trying really hard. But then when I went to college, I realized like, oh, like maybe I'm not as great as I thought I was. I was good, but I wasn't as great, and I didn't have the passion that these people had. So I think everything lies in that inner drive and passion and that hungerness of what your end goal is. And my end goal wasn't, I couldn't see myself in 3 to 5 years beating up my body to be a professional player.
I think it's really interesting what you said there, because I say that all the time. I think, and I love that you've related it back to business, because I use that analogy within business. I think it's really, really, really hard to put in the work that is required to be successful if you don't enjoy what you do, which is why I think so many businesses fail, because people go, I'm an entrepreneur, I want to own a business, so I'm going to go and start that thing over there because that's what looks like an attractive, profitable business model. And so they go into it with that kind of mindset, as opposed to, I have this problem that I think I can solve, or this is a problem that I have and I would like to solve it. And it's always those businesses, probably unsurprisingly based on what I've just said, that end up going on to be more profitable. And if we bring it back to social media, my God, like if you look at all the communities that you've grown and my personal brand and personal brands that we've built for other people, the ones that are the most successful are the ones where it's someone who is the center of that, is the driving force behind that brand, that social media account, that personal brand, and is really passionate and specific in what they're talking about. And to your point about likes and stuff, like it's really hard to keep posting about something and getting no likes if you don't really believe in what you're saying.
Yeah, I think if you think about it as just a conversation you're having with friends and you're just talking to people, and it's just like every post is just a conversation, and some people are going to like some of your conversations that you have with people, and some people are going to hate some of your conversations, or some people are just going to get bored. But if you actually excited to just like talk about it, like it doesn't really matter at the end of the day, because you're the one who's excited to talk about. But also I think when you're doing it, it's like, the way I think about like great social media is like, is it something that you would take the post and like share it in a group chat with your friends? If you had a bunch of like marketing, for me, if I had a bunch of marketing friends, but it is something I would text and be like, oh, I just heard this cool idea, blah, 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 let me send it out. That's how I think what a great post would be for me. And sometimes sometimes you in a group chat, people will be like, hell no, I don't get it, or fight you back or something in an honest round. But I think if you're not excited to like take that post out and it's just like work to do that, I think that's when it becomes an issue. But I think going also back to that, when people say I have this problem of not creating content, I think the also problem with those type of people is like, do you really like the subject enough that you're spending your free time like consuming that topic? Because I don't think like just because it's your day job doesn't mean you actually enjoy it. Like I genuinely like go listen to marketing podcasts when I'm going to the gym or on a walk, or generally would want to pick up a marketing book instead of another book, or generally, and that's where I get my ideas from. So I think the passion has to go beyond just like what you're doing in your career, because then you will hate it. That's why like these successful creators on TikTok and stuff, like most of them don't talk about their career because that isn't their passion. Their passion is cooking or dancing or doing something, and feels genuine to them. I genuinely like marketing, so that's why I like putting out marketing content. So if you genuinely just doing it not because you just because you want followers or have crazy opportunities, it might work for a short period of time, but it's hard to sustain that for a couple years.
I think it's a really good point to make, though. When people do say that, and it's not just personal brands, like obviously I'm coming from a personal branding niche because that's what I do. But company brands are also the same. They're like, well, what do we post? Like, how do we grow a community? What do we post to grow that community? And it's like, what is your brand values? What do you stand for? What does your community want, need, would find interesting for you? You're a great example of that with Marketing Millennials. Like you only put out.
I also think on that note right there, and this is something that I've been thinking about a lot lately and talking to a lot of people about, is that the greatest brands that put out the greatest type of content, the creators inside the brands are people who actually have that expertise to do that type of thing. So for example, like if you're a marketing company and your audience is marketers, you should have someone on the team. It doesn't have to be the writer per se, but you should have someone who could talk like marketers and are passionate about talking about to marketers, because then they'll make the content authentic. The problem is people expect these content marketers, which hats off to them, some of them are really great, to talk about something that they've never done in their life and try to resonate with that type of audience, which is super, super hard. So unless you have someone who has expertise in your company to talk to that content marketer, or your creator actually comes from that industry, I think those are the two ways to do it and come off authentic, instead of forcing content out there just because it fits your content roadmap.
Yeah, it's like that whole idea of like, just because someone's built a following somewhere doesn't mean they can build it somewhere else.
I've always said to people that if you told me to go build like an audience for electricians today, I couldn't, because I'm not passionate about it. I can't talk about it. I can't relate to them. I've never done that in my life. So it's harder to do that. But marketing is really easy to me because I do it on a day-to-day basis. I like talking about it. I like doing it. So I think that is the real key to doing, is like, you need passion, and also you need to have that willingness that when the times get hard, you still like talking about that subject. I think a lot of people don't actually like what they're talking about half the time, and it comes off really apparent in their content.
Which leads me really nicely onto Marketing Millennials and where that came from and why you started it, and what has that journey been like for you? Because that's how we met, right? We met because you just launched the podcast and we kind of interacted on LinkedIn. So yeah, where did it all start, and why did you do it, more importantly?
So I was building my personal brand, and I was realizing that it was hard to come up with the same problem as people have. It was hard to come up with topics every single day. So I was like, what is the best way to do that and have a machine for content? Oh, a podcast. So I was like, okay, let me just start this podcast, The Marketing Millennials. And it was just for me to create a bunch of content, talk to the best marketers, get ideas for content, and share more content to market, because I have this passion of just like helping marketers grow in their careers and sharing information.
Do you think that's
that
because
they
you
need.
didn't have that when you were younger?
Yeah, 100%. I always say to people that my biggest drive comes from that I wish I had the information in college and out of college that I do now. So I try to supply that information to people that are starting their career or in the middle of their career that are I'm not trying to appeal to a CMO or anything like that. I'm trying to appeal to the marketers that are growing in their career or just starting out in their career. So I think the podcast became that, and then the LinkedIn page came from, like, it was hard to get the best guests on my podcast, so I started posting tweets of like guests I really wanted on my podcast so they can see me, recognize the Marketing Millennials. So I posted that, and then they would hit me up and be like, thank you so much for sharing my content. I'll be like, oh, well, do you want to be a part of my podcast? And that's how really
I love that. It's like a business development tool.
It was not a tool to grow my LinkedIn page. The LinkedIn page, I literally told someone, and this is a funny story, I told them, I was like, if I can get Marketing Millennials to like 10K in 1 year, like that would be successful. Like if I can get that LinkedIn page to 10, just sharing marketing content, that would be successful. So
And where are you
it's
at
also
now?
Almost 250K. And it's funny because like that also is a lesson of like, we always, as humans and people, most of us, some aren't, are very confident, but always like undershoot our abilities to do things. And I think like if you told me 2 years ago where it would be, I would have said hell no. But I still think that like you should always like have this ambitious goal in the back of your head that helps you strive for more and more, even if you don't hit it. Because I think that sometimes if you strive for bigger and you land closer to the goal, it's still more than you would have like predicted that you would ever get to. So I think that just came off of just, but at the end of the day, like that, some great ideas and some of the greatest things just come from testing things, and they just fall into people's laps. I think like this one is lucky, but I think luck is also when there's timing involved and you prepared to do it. And if I didn't have my personal brand before, I wouldn't have been able to grow the company page. So I think all these little steps added to it. Like I always say to people who are trying to grow company brands, like mine happened because I had a personal brand. It's not because one day I woke up and just started like posting content on the Marketing Millennials and it started having good traction in the market. So
Do you think there's a similarity between a company brand and a personal brand? Because I kind of see it as, like, a lot of people think that I think personal branding should replace company branding. I don't think that at all. I actually think quite the opposite. I think that the personal brand of the founder or the leadership team is like the backhand of a really strong tennis player. And the company brand is like the forehand of that really great tennis player. If you have one of those things, you're a decent tennis player, right? If you're just constantly backhanding, you're okay. If you have one of them, right, you can potentially win the match. You just run backwards and forwards and do lots of forehand, lots of backhands. If you have both of those, you're going to be a million times better than someone who's on the other side of the tennis court who only has a strong forehand or backhand. So I love what you're saying there about you got to build your company brand because your personal brand was so strong. So to bring it back to my question, do you think there are similarities between the two? And if so, what are they? And if not, then what are they?
The similarities that I think is that a company brand should feel human, should have a personality. Those, I think, the similarities. The difference is that one is you're the product and one is something else is the product, and one you have to educate someone on a need and why they would want a product. So you have to have a strong messaging and story, and it has to be well thought out through a bunch of different channels. Where like a personal brand, you could do a couple of things randomly and still grow. Where a company brand, like things have to all flow through a cohesive story, and everything should be messaging, right? But at the end of the day, I think the very similarities is both need to feel human, both need to feel authentic, both need to feel personal, and both, if you're trying to grow, should deliver some sort of value to like the end person. But there's less stress when it comes to a personal brand, because I think there's more people on the line when you're growing a company. There's people's jobs, there's people's like livelihoods, there's a product, you're helping a lot of customers, and I think there's more things on the line when you're building a brand. So you have to be more methodical with it and more thoughtful with it. And I'm not saying you shouldn't build your personal brand, but I think you can get away with building a strong personal brand by just talking about things you're passionate about. I think you can't build a strong company brand by just talking about like anything. You have to be methodical, talking to the right audience, picking that audience, deciding how that story is relevant to that audience, and then how am I gonna. And you also have to think about the competitive landscape. I think you never think about that when you're growing a personal brand, really. Like, I've never thought about other people in the marketing space that much. I've took inspiration from them, but I've never like thought about them that much. I think you can easily be beat out as a company brand, where like your personal brand like is nobody else can be you. So it's hard. If you be yourself, nobody really can copy you. Some people might not like you and might not like that person, so it's hard. But I know this is a long-winded answer, but I don't think they're the same. But I think there are very good correlations of people who have built strong personal brands that a lot of companies should take. And I think there's also the aspect of a lot of companies that build a good brand, and people could take some aspects of it and use it, but I don't think they're interchangeable. I think you need both to be successful. Like, I think a founder having expertise and talking is a good aspect of a strong company brand, but it's only a pillar of it. It's not the whole brand, because there's so many other aspects that need to go to it.
100%. And also, the founder of the business is not the business, which I think is a really important point to make. You know, you have your own personality, your own views. Like, I've made it a point to make my business really separate from my personal brand. So, like, the tone of voice that Klowt has and the content that Klowt shares is very different to the stuff that I talk about on purpose, because otherwise you're at the risk then of people like wanting to work with just you and not the wider business.
I think there's a perfect example of this too. Like, if you see, like, if you look at two separate communities, like if you look at a community like the hustle versus looking at like something that's built around a personal brand, it's so much easier to sell something that is built on the hustle, because someone else could run it, the mentality. But if there's a personal brand attached to it, you're always going to have to be involved in that business to make it successful. And that's the difference. I think like a company can go forever, where a personal brand legacy might be able to go forever, but you can keep creating content as that individual. And I think that's the biggest difference, is that it is also more marketable in the market to have something that's a brand that could stand alone, that anybody can buy from you today. That's the way I think about it too. It's like, it's harder to sell something that is just attached to you, and it's easy to burn out that way when it's attached to you.
On the other side though, like, brand messages are shared 24 times more by individuals who work within that business than by the company brand socials. It's like 24x if I shared my content versus when my company brand shares my content. So with that in mind, and based on what you just said, like, what would you say to someone who's like, well, what's the point of this then? If like I want to sell my business, I want to exit, why am I going to build my personal brand when I don't want it to be tied to me forever?
Because people buy from people, and people buy from people that they like. And I think what separates a lot of companies, and the reason why people have personal brands in a company, is because it gives that company a sense of humanization. It gives a company of like people I want to work with. It gives people, because a lot of the companies are just bought on straight brand because they, for example, if you're selling to marketers and you have a bunch of like your CMO is talking about marketing, you're going to trust that company more because you're like, oh, they get marketing. Like they get it. Like the people in the company get marketing. And where if you have just your brand talking about it, it's like, what is the story behind the brand? Do they actually understand my problems? Do I do it? And if you have personal brands, you can do that very easily. I also think that on another point that's not attached to the company is that you're not going to be at that company forever. So you need to build something that will last you your whole career and your whole life. And there's a lot of opportunities that will come outside of it that's not attached to your company. Like, say if you're a founder, there's investment opportunities, there's webinars, there's speaking engagements, there's potentially a potential co-founder down the line. There's all these opportunities that you're building up, and you're entering rooms that you would never be in because people are talking about you. So I think it helps the business grow expertise and trust, but it also helps you for the long run be seen as someone who's an expert in that space. So if you wanted to go start something else tomorrow in that space, they'll be like, oh, it's that person's company. Oh, that makes sense. Like they're starting it. Where it's harder when you're a founder and you now have to go retell the story to everybody again of why you came and do this. Your story, if your story's already out there, it's way easier to just focus on your idea, and the story becomes natural of why you started it.
It's really interesting actually, because I had Ash Jones and Dominic McGregor on the podcast last week and a couple of weeks ago, and Ash Jones was the guy behind Stephen Bartlett's personal brand, and Dominic McGregor was Stephen Bartlett's co-founder at Social Chain. And both of them said, like, the reason why they started building Stephen's personal brand, which is now like this behemoth, millions of followers. He's on Dragon's Den, which is basically the UK version of Shark Tank. He's huge. He's probably one of the biggest personal brands in the UK, at least of a certain generation. And the reason they did that was exactly what you just said. They realized that there's only a certain number of people that they can tell the story of Social Chain to at any given time. So whether it's a one-on-one conversation or a speaking gig, that it's limited, right? Whereas if you start doing that online, that's infinitely scalable. You could reach millions of people with that same story that you otherwise would only reach 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 100 people, maybe 1,000 people if you're doing a speaking gig. You can reach so many more people by telling your story online. And yet, all of us, including Stephen Bartlett, believe it or not, at some point when we first start kind of posting content, have this fear. So how did you overcome that?
That's a great question. I think for me, it was just doing it. I think like it just became like this thing where I'll post and I'll just keep trying and trying. And I think it also became because I felt comfortable and confident of what the messaging I was saying. So I think like I got marketing, but I think at the same time I was like, okay, let me just do this. And I also think it became from a lot of like people that I followed, like I would say Gary Vee and stuff like that, who was just like, just go do it. And I was just like, it came from other people's like inspiration of like, just test out like what's the worst thing that could happen. Also the athlete background in me was just like, okay, if you're going to be good at something, you just have to try it. But also what I said before, it was a lot of like that stuff that was built up in the past, the failed things that I have posted before. So it came kind of not natural, but it was like, okay, let me post some more, and then once you start getting a little glimmer of like something happening, like you don't know, it's like you can't really
The little
measure
dopamine
it.
hit of like, oh, someone liked my post.
Yeah, or like also like when someone reaches out in your DMs and says, hey, like I really enjoying your content, and or stuff like that, and it's just like, oh, I'm actually like helping people doing it. I think that's got over that it's not just for me that I'm doing it, it's doing it for like other people. And I think when I took me out of the equation, part of the equation, it made it a little bit easier. But I think I still have fear of posting today. Like it's not like something that goes away for me. I think it's easier, but I think I still, when I'm writing a post, have some thoughts of like how is it going to be taken by people. It's just like,
And how do you push through
inherently.
that? Do you just go, you know what, I have these thoughts all the time and I'm just going to press go? Because there'll be a lot of people listening to this going, I feel like that every single day. And I always caveat my posts, or I make them too long. I try and explain myself. Like, I have an opinion about something, and then I feel like I can't have that opinion because it's going to offend someone. Like, how do you push through that? Because that's mental blockers and emotional blockers are so potential limiting, not just for personal brands, but in life.
I think when you know that it isn't just one post, it's like your whole story is told over 1,000, 10,000 posts. Like one post is not gonna do something. Obviously, don't go off the rails and like say something that is gonna get you canceled, because the cancel culture is real.
And how
But
do you, just to pause you there, because I want to make that, like, such an important point you just mentioned there. Cancel culture is real. How on earth do you navigate that? Because I'm convinced that at some point I'm going to say something that someone's not going to like, and they're going to dig it back up from 5 years ago, and I'm going to be cancelled just purely because I have strong opinions. And I would never intentionally post anything to upset anyone or offend anyone, but I have very strong opinions that a lot of people don't like. And it worries me. I appreciate when people say things that are offensive or, are racist or homophobic. Like, fair fucking play. Like, if people are out there sharing those kind of opinions, like, that's disgusting. But I do feel like we're going down this road now, particularly with social media, where we've lost tolerance for other people's opinions, and we can't sit there and listen and have a debate about stuff. We have to be right. And if someone's sharing an opinion that we don't agree with, we have to tell them why they're wrong and convince them why we're right. And actually, imagine if we all thought the same way and all had the same opinions, how fucking boring life would be. And we would never progress as a society, because the reason why the light bulb was invented, the reason why the car was invented, the reason why the plane was invented was because people thought outside of the box and they went and did something different to other people.
I think it comes back to like your audience that you build and the people that you surround yourself with, like know the true you. And I think that the people who are trying to normally cancel people are sometimes worse than the people who are actually being canceled, because they're doing the same thing back to them, which is like online bullying and affecting them. But I think at the same time, to me, it's like I know the context of my post, so I can back it up in a real way. If you can't back up what you're trying to say and you're just saying it to just create shit, then it's different. But
Or worse, saying stuff and then being like, because I said so, and not having any like.
Yeah, you have to be able to back it up. I think, but I think also like when you build a community, and you probably know this, like the true people who you've built and talked to know who you are. And I think like if we wouldn't be human if we made one or two or three or 20 mistakes out there. But I think it's just knowing. I think although it's becoming like when you post, you have to have some empathy in your body. Like I think you gotta like say like this is controversial, but like, is this like something that is like at this point in time in the world, is it going to affect other people in the wrong way? Because like I saw a post yesterday where this like, I don't know if you saw it, but it was on Twitter, but this like Bain Capital posted a thing of like announcing their board, and it was all like men, and it was on International Women's Day, and it's like come on, like you got to have more like thought and like caring to know what day you're posting that on. It might just still got wrapped because you should have diversity in your board, and you should have, but I think like if you don't have empathy to know like this is not a good post, you're gonna get those
like who approved this content plan, Bain? Who approved this content plan?
Exactly. It's like who approved like posting this on, especially on a day where you shouldn't be posting it, and it shouldn't be posted at all because it was just like a weird post. But I think sometimes it's like, but I also have empathy for that person because I'm like, I think that generally they were trying to say like hype up that they have all these good people in their company, and I think the intention wasn't to be like, I'm going to like be horrible like and screw people. So I think at the same time it's like, yes, that was a stupid thing to post, but at the other time it's like, I don't think the intention behind it was terrible. Like I don't think they were trying to necessarily hurt people. I think they just did something stupid at that point in time, and that's the difference. I think that when the intention is to go out and hurt people, I think that is a different, like when you're posting that type of stuff, I think just know what the intentions behind your post are before you post it. I think that's the biggest thing. If your intention is just to like create conversation, that's fine. Or if there's actual genuine good, because some people get canceled for genuinely like things that they thought was right at the time, and it was culturally appropriate at the time and stuff like that, and I just feel like bad for them for that. But I think also, I do think that some people make mistakes, and also I've seen some people who generally should be canceled because they're saying terrible things, like they should be canceled. But I also think some of the cancelers are what they're going after these people. Like, would you want to be that person who someone's going after you, like off some of your posts? Like, think about it before you're going to go after someone, because it is hard to create, like it's hard to put yourself out there. So I think like if you're going to go and do that to someone, just think how you would like someone to just like go at you like that, even if it's in a workplace environment, stuff like that. I think you just gotta I just try to have that empathy, because I don't, and it's just because I've been posting for a while, like I don't go try publicly attack anybody. Even if they say something, if I do think something's wrong, I'll go in their DMs and be like, hey, like you shouldn't be posting this stuff like online. It's affecting people.
I was going to ask you, kind of circle back to Marketing Millennials, and I still want to do that because I think the podcast is awesome, and I know I've certainly, having just launched this one, would love to pick your brains about everything you did, because your podcast is huge now. But I think that's a really important point to make about this whole thing. Like, I know we flip-flopped between talking about marketing, personal branding, and social media and stuff, but the reality is when you put yourself out there, you do open the doors to people liking you, but also people really not liking you. And with everything being online, people will tell you that they don't like you in the most savage way. And kind of, it can be really difficult to deal with that sometimes. Have you had any experiences online where you've had really negative interactions with people, and if so, how did you handle them?
Yeah, I get it. I mean, I've got it a couple of times, and I get it on my podcast, and I get it. Like, people have came at me and said, "Oh, you say too many times on your podcast, and if I had a drinking game, then blah blah blah. Like, I'll be drunk by then." And they say like some rude things, but at the end of the day, I think what I always go back to thinking of is like, how many people am I actually helping with this podcast, and then how many of those like that small like minor group of people that are attacking me actually like,
It's like, what's the
there's
upside
pros and
versus the
cons.
downside?
Yeah. And the downside is like I'm going to get some of that. Like I'm going to get people saying my content sometimes is basic. I'm going to get some people who are going to say I'm not the best speaker, or I'm not the best marketer, or I'm not the, and I never claim to be. And I think, but the upside is if I look at my DMs and I get people coming to me and saying, I love your podcast, or I love this, it's helped me do this in my career, it's helped me advance in my career, like that's what keeps me going. I think it's that positive reinforcement. And I go back when I see something negative to all my DMs, and that people have said something positive, and I'm like, okay, this is why I'm doing it. I'm doing like the other day I was almost going to say, like, I said to myself, should I quit podcasting because these people, like 3 people came at me because of they didn't like the way didn't pronounce words properly, or like I said, like too much in the podcast. And then I thought to myself, all these people, there's tons of people that email me every day that say, I love your podcast and stuff like that. And why would I let these 2 or 3 people who keep saying mean stuff to me dull that? And I think that's what keeps me going, is that I know that I'm helping people, and I see it in the DMs, and it might not be those type of people. And that's also a good lesson, is like some people aren't your audience, and you got to just accept it. Like you got to accept that not everybody's going to like you. And that's what I realized. Like I accept that not everybody's going to like my content, and not everybody's going to like me as a person.
The amazing thing about your personality is it attracts who you want it to attract, and it repels who you want it to repel. And I think people focus too much on the people that are being repelled and not enough on the people that they're attracting. And quite honestly, the best piece of advice I've ever had, and this was literally after just like a meltdown of someone like trolling me on LinkedIn. I like a couple of years ago, I like messaged my friend. I was like, what do I do? And he was like, listen, Amelia, never, ever, ever take criticism from someone you wouldn't take advice from. And I just think that's like the perfect way to summarize how to deal with people who are just, quite honestly, not your people anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. That's the best advice too. I think I live by that as well.
I want to circle back though to your podcast, because first of all, it's how we met. Second of all, it's the best fucking marketing podcast out there, I think. You certainly have a real gift in order to be able to get all the good stuff from people and the most amazing people on the pod. So I know you mentioned like you started it as like kind of like a BD tool, or to learn rather from other people. What tips would you give people like me, selfishly, because I want to know, how did you go about it? Like, how did you launch it? Like, how do you get guests? Like, how hard is podcasting really? Because like I went into this podcast thinking this was going to be a piece of piss. We would go and do studio days. It'll be super easy. And the work that actually is involved in getting a podcast off the ground and getting consistent listens and consistent downloads, it's like, it's really hard. So what's that journey been like for you, and what advice could you give to someone else who's trying to jump on that too?
I think just know why you're starting it, because I think if you're starting it to get clout at the beginning, it's not going to happen, because there's
no pun intended.
Yeah, there's no algorithm. There is search engine, but there's no like way to bring up a podcast in like Spotify, and there's so many different channels where it's on, so you kind of have to self-promote it. But I think it's really the test of patience of podcasts. I think it's how could I stick it out for the long game and learn and learn and learn. And if I would go back and do it again, when I thought about it at the beginning, there was no really playbook. I was just like, okay, let's just do it to create more content. My goal was just to get more great people to share ideas to people, because I didn't want to be the only voice talking. And I think that what keeps me going too. And also, like selfishly, it's just a great way to network. It's a great way to build up a network. It's a great way to have conversation with smart people. And I always say this to people, it's the easiest way to say, can I pick your brain for 30 minutes without saying, can I pick your brain for 30 minutes? It's the easiest way to do it.
And I said it's so flattering to be asked to be on a podcast, right? Like, you know, if you're someone that wants to get guests, like you said, like asking to pick your brain for 30 minutes is nowhere near as attractive as like I would love to, like I love what you're about, like I've been following your content for a while, like can you come and be on my podcast? I'd be honored. Like that's flattering.
And I also think just like know where you are in the podcast journey. I think that's a big thing. Like you're not going to get the big fish, and sometimes the big fish don't get as much downloads as people think they do. I think some of the people who are like the most underrated people are some of the most downloaded podcasts for me. So I think,
And quite often the most interesting.
exactly, like sometimes it's just like some people get guests because they're like, oh, they're gonna share it on their network for me, and most of the time they don't share it on their network for them. So I think go into saying that I want to have some interesting conversations, and I also just like, since I have a full-time job and stuff like that, the way I think about podcast guests are, is this someone that I want to have a conversation with? Because I don't have, if you get a guest that you don't really want to have a conversation with, then it's going to take so much work to do research about them and understand them. And I know but like really for me, it's like, or is it a guest I want to talk to, or is it a topic that I really want to learn more about? And those are the two things that I think about. Or is it a topic that my audience really wants to get more information about, and could I find better people? I think those are the three things I think about. And I think when you think about it like that, it becomes really easier to start like finding guests that you want and planning content. But I think for me, it was just, I want to have conversations with interesting people about interesting topics that I want to learn more about, and then I can make the podcast more interesting because I'm going to be genuinely excited to talk to that person because I really want to learn about that topic. So I think that's how I thought, or I really want to talk to this person, so how could I talk to this person? So I think that helped me a lot.
Favorite episode you've recorded?
It has to be, even though I just said big names, but I think it has to be Rory Sutherland, because he's just like one of the smartest like consumer behavior person out there, and I really loved his book, and I was just like in awe that he wanted to come on the podcast. So I think that was one of my favorite conversations that I've ever had. But I would say that every one of my guests that came on, I've learned something from. And I think that's what the great part about it is, like every one of my guests has shared something amazing that I learned from. So it's hard to pick one, but Rory was one of the ones that I was like, I've never been in a room with someone that shares ideas. Like every point he made was like, I've never heard someone talk like that before. It was just like, how could someone be that smart?
And who would your dream guest be? If you could pick like anyone.
Going big names again, probably like.
It's like, guys, don't get big names on your podcast. My favorite one is the biggest name, and like there's one that I dream one I'm about to say is a big name.
But that's because I want to have conversation with him. But I think like there's so many people that like I've talked to that I've learned more than the big guests that I've had. So it's like Rory was a great one because it just was like a book I loved. But I think like I've had people like, see, Amelia came to my podcast and I was like, oh, I learned a lot about personal branding that I didn't know before. And I was like, oh, this was a great, and I saw her posting about it online and I was like, oh, I want to talk to her more about this. So it's like, generally, like if you want to talk to, I say don't get big names because I don't think it's necessary to like grow your podcast. I think good conversation is. So I think, but I also like want to, Gary Vee is just someone I want to be in the room with because he likes things I like. So I think but the only reason I know about him is because he has a personal brand. So there's so many people I probably would want to talk to, but I just don't know who they are because they're not posting today.
Another reason why building your personal brand is so important. Opportunities, networking.
Yeah.
It's networking at scale, basically.
That's what I always say too. I think it's like, it opens more doors because people will come to you instead of you having to go to people. And that's what
I love that.
it's kind of like a great magnet for people.
You said, I reckon when I first met you, it must have been, so in like 2020, you said marketing is psychology. Why do you think that?
Um, I think I think the root of it is knowing how to connect with people, and I think that the root of a lot of things is knowing how to connect with people. But I think like at the root of marketing is understanding how to talk to people, how to understand why they do something, how to understand their wants, their needs. And I think if you understand that, it makes it so much more easier, because you actually could have empathy for why people are doing something. And that's why I think it is, because once I knew like inherent why people are doing things, it made more sense, instead of me like assuming they're doing things for a reason that is selfish because I'm making an assumption that they're doing something.
Well, it's this whole argument of like data driven versus data like, what's the right word? Led, right? So you can follow all the data in the world with marketing, all the data, like personal branding is a great example of this, right? You could sit there on your Shield account for LinkedIn or Sprout Social, whatever it is that you use to get your stats. You could sit there for hours and analyze why that post went viral, and look at the views and what time you posted it and what day it went out and all that kind of stuff. But the reality is, the reason why something's done well is probably because it hit a nerve with the people that you wanted to hit a nerve with, right? I think a lot of the time people, particularly company brands for sure, because there's not that human element to it, and I think they forget the psychology behind what it is that they're trying to do. But I think with personal brands, people can get really kind of hung up on like, I need to get more views, I need to get more likes, I need to get whatever. And when you go down that road, you completely forget the whole point, which is I'm trying to appeal to another human being, which is all psychological. It's like, how can I enrage this person? How can I educate this person? How can I inspire this person? How can I entertain this person? If you can do one of those things, which is psychological, it's got nothing to do with this is the cheapest thing I'm selling or this is the best product I'm selling, then you're onto a winner. I mean, there's a reason why Gymshark is the biggest gymwear brand in the world, and it's got nothing to do with the quality of their clothes.
Yeah, and I think you said it really right, is that it comes down to what emotion can you spark, but also like if you knowing that likes and stuff are going to give you dopamine hits and stuff like that, and it's just like, it also helps you understand yourself of why you're making decisions. I think that's a big thing too, is like you're understanding that you're making these decisions not because it's making you happy in the moment, but you got to think of more long term of like what's going to be more satisfying, 1,000 likes today or that opportunity in 2 years.
I love that. It's all about the goal. So speaking of goals, personal branding, how did you first of all start? Because we met on LinkedIn, right? And as far as I know, LinkedIn was your like a OG channel for your personal brand, and since then you've kind of cross-pollinated into other channels which I want to dig into as well. But why did you start building your personal brand, and like practically how did you do it? Because I think you have a specific style of content which you've kind of become known for, right?
I did it because honestly I wanted to test out LinkedIn, which is a bad answer to give. But I think
test out for what? For your personal brand or for company stuff?
Well, I wanted to see like if people were right that you can get, or because I'm a kind of a marketer at trade, so I just think about like, I was like, oh, does it really have organic reach, this platform? Let me test it, because nobody will let me test it internally. And then I started testing it, and then I was like, oh, actually this is fun to share my ideas out here. Let me just keep doing it. And I just kind of fell into it, and then I realized it was personal branding. I didn't even know what that word was when I started it. Like, it wasn't like, oh, I'm out here to build a personal brand. I was just like, I'm out here to share. Just wanted to share content out there. And then I started understanding like how to do it, because I was like, oh, I'm posting things that are so random. Like I need to be more niche down, because that's how you should do it in marketing. And then I was like, well, I love talking about marketing. Let's talk about marketing. And then once I started learning that, and also taking inspiration of like great people who are doing it already, like helped me a lot.
So you started on LinkedIn, you started growing, you grew super fast on LinkedIn. And then you moved to Twitter and have like the followers you've amassed there and the community you've amassed there is amazing as well. But now you pretty much screenshot stuff you post on Twitter and then share that on LinkedIn, and that's kind of become synonymous with your personal brand. Like you're the guy that shares tweets on LinkedIn basically, and there's a lot of people now that kind of have tried to emulate that and have had nowhere near as success because it's kind of ripping you off really. Why did you do that? And also, why was it important for you to nail one channel and then go and start another one? Like, what was the thought process behind that?
My whole thing was like, you have limited resources in the day, and I wanted to just understand LinkedIn completely before I moved to any other channel. I did that before I moved to podcasting, and then once I got podcasting, I felt comfortable to go to Twitter. But I also knew those are platforms where my audience hang out on like a lot. So I went to platforms where they hung out a lot. And the reason I started posting tweets on, I mean, obviously the one thing at Marketing Millennials did it, but the reason I started sharing is like when you have limited time, it's hard to create for 2 platforms or 3 platforms. So the best thing to do is just repurpose. So how I like to think about it is one channel is your top of funnel content, and then it trickles down to the other channels. So I started focusing on Twitter, so inherently it started trickling down to other platforms. And right now I'm still focusing on Twitter, so I think like it's trickled down to LinkedIn. The reason, because that's my top of funnel content. But if LinkedIn was my top of funnel content, I probably would spend more time doing things that are more testing and stuff like that. But I think right now it's working what I'm doing, so why stop it until it stops working, in my opinion.
So just practically, how do you, to reverse engineer what you just said, you said like you have a cornerstone platform, right? So for you currently it's Twitter. For me it's probably LinkedIn, but I'm trying to make it my podcast, like the podcast, right? Like I want this to be my top of funnel, if you like. How do you practically do that? How do you practically have like Twitter is your top of funnel and then you distribute it onto other channels? Because some channels are visual, some channels are copy based, some channels are video. Like how do you do that?
I think you think about it as the way I think about top of channel. There's 2 ways to think about top of funnel is one for content creation and one for driving people to other platforms. And I think a podcast is really good for top of funnel for creating content on other platforms, because you could take clips and then turn them into text and images. But I think when you have like a top of funnel platform that has a lot of reach, like LinkedIn or TikTok, or if you become well established on Twitter, you can have a lot. It becomes a way to push people to other platforms. So there's that type of top of funnel where you could push people to other platforms. Like LinkedIn has pushed a lot of people to my podcast. So I thought of LinkedIn as a top of funnel thing to push it. If I thought about top of funnel content, it probably would be the cornerstone would be like a podcast or a YouTube, because it's long form and I can cut it up. So there's 2 things I think about as a cornerstone, like what channel could drive to other channels, and then what channels that I can create and cut up content with.
So it's almost like having 2 flywheels. Like what's the kick? Mm-hmm. What's the thing that starts the momentum for both those things?
Exactly.
I love that. And so talk to me about like, okay, so we've got Twitter. You screenshot Twitter. We know that. How do you then take that onto like, say, TikTok? And actually, before you answer that question, why should you be on TikTok? Because I think there's this weird thing that everyone feels like, oh, I've nailed LinkedIn, so now I have to go on Instagram and I have to be on Twitter and I have to be on Twitter, like Instagram and TikTok and YouTube and whatever. And my whole thing is you should be where your audience is, not where you think your audience is. So just because Twitter is right for you, Daniel Murray, doesn't mean that it's right for Steve sitting at home listening to this. So first of all, how did you decide that Twitter and TikTok and wherever these places that you are were the right places to be? And like, you know, how did you even work out those audiences? And then the second thing is, how do you turn tweets, for example, or LinkedIn content into TikToks, or podcast content into TikToks?
I think it first starts what I said before is like you should only be on a platform if your audience is on that platform. But I also think it also is resource based. So like you can't be on a platform if you don't have the resources to go 100% on that platform. So I think, but to the question of how do you take those content and put it on other platforms, I think you just look at your best performing posts, and you create content in the form of that channel. And I think someone said this, which I saw a TikTok about it. It was kind of funny, but the best TikToks are just like regurgitated tweets, like in TikTok form. So like they saying it as a TikTok and they saying the tweet as a TikTok as an example of it, and they just create it for the platform. So I think you just have to understand, but I think you have to spend time on a platform before you start posting on it to understand the rules of the game. It's like you don't go play basketball or like soccer without looking at the rule book or getting learned how to the little bit of the rules of the game to become good at it, because otherwise you can't. So like respect the rules of the platform before you do it, because you're not going to grow very fast that way, and you just the platform won't like it. A lot of people, what they do is take a post and they'll put it on every channel. It's like, no, that platform doesn't like content like that. So why are you doing it? Sometimes you're not supposed to be on a platform because you don't have the resources to go 100% in that platform.
Do you think, what advice would you give for someone who is listening to this and has already identified what platforms they should be on? What advice would you give them? Like, what next step should they take?
I think pick your one top of funnel channel that you're thinking of creating content on. And I think the one that you should think about, I think you should think about it like how I said before, is one is a top of funnel reach platform and one's a top of funnel content platform. And I think if you think about it like that, like LinkedIn and TikTok are great platforms to push to other platforms, but they're not like longer sustain, like they probably aren't going to be as sustaining as a platform as like a YouTube or a podcast or a newsletter. So you have to build these top of funnel channels to push people to other platforms, and then those other platforms are just things that are like, you should pick one that is a long-standing platform that's like a podcast or a newsletter or a YouTube channel that will probably be around for a longer period of time because it's built that way. And you start
and will survive everything, right? Like
yeah,
you can constantly be churning content out.
Yeah, so I always think like, but for like long form, like if you're like a video person, like I would start by creating a long YouTube video and cut it down. I would start creating, if I was a writer, like starting out, like I would start writing like a longer blog and then cut it down to a smaller things. But I think also do what you're comfortable with. I think a lot of people also make that mistake. It's like some people aren't meant to talk on TikTok, and some people aren't meant to write because they're not writers, and some people aren't meant to speak because they're on podcasts. So I think pick what you're actually good at, I think, and then double down on what you're good at. And then if you want to build other channels, maybe you end up hiring someone who's actually good at that channel to help you run it.
Klowt.
I think that's how you do it, though. I think you can't be great at every channel, and I think you need to start with the channel that you think you can be great at first and then move to other channels, but be great at that channel first before you start dedicating resources to another channel and another channel, because then your time's going to get slimmer and slimmer and slimmer, and then you're not going to create great content on every platform. You're just going to create average.
I love that advice. That's exactly what I did. I nailed LinkedIn and then went on TikTok and now podcast, and it's the best way to do it, I think, because you then you get to know who you are and what you're about as well. So, final question of this podcast, and this is something that I ask every single person that comes on here. And it's weirdly kind of inspired by a post that I saw you do, and then I did my own version of it. What are 3 things that you would like to go back and tell your 21-year-old self?
It's a great question. I think one, I would say start building an audience online, the first thing.
Obviously.
Yeah, that's one. I think 2 would be that don't underestimate consistency. Like, consistency will win in the long run, in everything. If it's investing, if it's in building an audience, if it's in your career, like showing up every single day, doing above average work, if it's 80%, 90% of the time, you're going to succeed, if it's above average. And I think the last thing I would probably say to myself is, like, invest in yourself more, meaning like your learning, your health, your career, like double down on yourself. Like you're the best investment that you can make. I think you forget that, and when you're younger, like you rather spend money going on a trip than on a course, or you rather spend money like doing something else beside that. But I think, or putting it in your investment account for later. So investing in yourself and your money is something that I would say longer, because again, that compounding effect in life is so crucial that I didn't fully grasp it until now.
And that's true of your money, your career, your education, your personal brand, everything.
Yeah, the compounding effect is crucial, and and I think it adds up. Like, if you're consistently doing something, and that will consistently compound, and that's like why I would say both those things, because I think like you could say invest, but like if you're not doing it consistently, it won't do it. So I think consistency is like something that people like. It's the easiest advice, and people always say it's easy, but not many people who go out and be consistent.
It's because it's not sexy, Daniel. It's not sexy to be like, be consistent. Like, it's so much more attractive to be like 7-minute abs than it is to be like, go to the gym for 12 months. But we all know which is the one that's going to produce the results.
Yeah, I mean, you all know, like, every little thing that you just said, like going to the gym consistently, or eating in a calorie deficit for a consistent amount of time, meaning like 80% of the time, 90% of the time, or going for a daily walk. All those little actions add up to big actions. It's the same with personal brand, going back to why this podcast is, but like all those little interactions you do, all those little, like getting on a call with someone, all those podcasts you do, all those posts you put out, all put like a little bit into this like wheel that keeps turning, and then eventually it could go faster and faster and faster, and you start seeing crazy things like what you did with starting Klowt, or with something like the Marketing Millennials, or with making connections that are valuable for a lifetime. I think it wouldn't have happened if I didn't, like, I wouldn't be where I am today if I didn't invest in doing something consistently. And I think that's what a lot of people miss, and it's harder than said than done. Like, it's hard to things like some of the greatest things and some things that you are passionate about is going to be hard. But someone said the other day to me that I was like, there's difference between hard work and working hard. Like hard work, like what we do is it's not the hardest of work, but we work hard at doing it. And I think that's the difference. I think like you could work hard doing easy things over time that add up, or you could do something. Hard work necessarily doesn't mean that hard work could mean that like it's your struggle getting up every day to do it. Like that could be hard work, or you have mental blocks doing it. It's not like hard work doesn't mean you're going to go out and go do manual labor. Like hard work is something that doing something you're not passionate about and getting up every day and doing it. Or some people don't have the opportunity to do the easier work, which I totally understand, and I have so much empathy for people who can. But I just think that like if you do things, these little things, simple things today, and you think presently what it's going to do for the long run, I think that flywheel effect will add up. And that's what I've noticed in my personal brand, my football, my career. It was all these little things that I did that it ended up being bigger things. It was never like one big thing that turned me to something.
People overestimate what they can achieve in a day and underestimate what they can achieve in a decade. I think
it's true. Like nobody thinks that long. Yeah, nobody thinks that long, and I think that's the problem. And I still struggle with it. I still think sometimes shorter term than I should be. Like when you get that gratification, it's hard sometimes you just gotta try snap out and think about that. Or those hard times, it's hard to snap out those hard times and keep on doing it. But I think if you, again, going back to the passion, and also I think it's also passion is great, but I think you always have to have a huge goal that you're striving for, like something that you're really striving to. Like even if you don't do it, like if you see like these biggest entrepreneurs and stuff like that, their whole goal isn't like making money. Like some of them is like changing the world, like, and that's what gets them up every day, because their goal is way bigger than just like, I want to make $1 billion. I think like their goal is like, how could I make the most impact? And I think it could be a small, like a big, like it doesn't have to be that grand of a goal, but I think if you have a huge goal that will get you up every morning that you're passionate about, then I think it helps you, because like it's not enough to just have passion for something you do. You also have to have something that you're striving for in the future to keep you thinking about like that target in the future that you might hit. So I think you always have to be thinking about that end goal.
I love that. Daniel, thank you so much for being on the pod. Yeah, it's been awesome. I could keep talking to you for another hour and a half. Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.